found the shoebox in a locked filing cabinet. It was full of tapes, mostly high 8 analog, a few digital, some Super 8 film. The labels were faded, barely legible. They sounded like places: Simcon, Fort Irwin, DARPA, Hohenfels, ICT, 29 Palms. There were some interviews. Admiral Sobrowski, General Clark, Paul Virilio. Under the box, I found more tapes. Old VHS and 1-inch broadcast tapes.
It may sound like something out of science fiction, but we need to recognize that this was a new kind of war, a war of speed and surveillance, simulation and spectacle, a pop war ready-made for the video arcade. It was our first cyber war.
It took 5 years, but with the help of eBay and a group of co-conspirators. I discovered Project Z.
The world had shifted. The fall of the Berlin Wall opened up possibilities for change, and I thought, well, this is it. Let's see who's modeling the new world. And it was the military. So that's why I went on the road. I decided, well, let's test this. Let's empirically test some of these ideas. So that started, and then you get moving on these journeys. You find out something at each stop that gives you a reason to go further.
It was like going down the rabbit hole. I had to follow to the end to see just how weird it could get.
Hey, while the camera's going, what was this dream you had the other night?
Oh, it was very strange. I'd been on the ground out here. It's my 5th time, but this time I'd been down here about 3 days. I had a very vivid dream about a corporation grabbed up thousands of square miles of land near here. The corporation's name was Warco. And their whole idea was, let's create an environment where we can simulate battles and contract for various nations. This is the way they can solve their problems with decisions coming down from a world court-like power, and it would help out the corporate structure around the world. So Warco was formed, and they were marketing this to different countries.
This dream you had the other night, did it have a happy ending?
Didn't get to the ending.
Great.
My virtual Hajj began at Fort Irwin to see how the future of warfare was being written in the sands of the Mojave Desert. I was there to witness the Advanced Warfighting Experiment, aka AWE, an early forerunner of what Donald Rumsfeld would later call shock and awe. In the blank slate of the Californian desert, I witnessed the beginnings of a so-called revolution in military affairs.
In the future, who do you see the simulations being fought against, given the changing nature of the international system?
Well, the threat will consistently change. What we need to do is we need to train against a well-trained, well-organized threat, even if that threat is maybe non-existent right now as far as a potential adversary. Right now at the NTC, we fight the Krasnovians. The Krasnovians use Soviet-style doctrine, but they are unlike any Soviet army on Earth because there is no Soviet army anymore.
4 BRDM 285s, and these were purchased from the old East German war stocks.
What a way to get money.
Cash money and drive it away.
That's right.
Now, who do you see as the next enemy that would be using a Soviet military doctrine?
I'd say anything like Syria. I think Syria, maybe Jordan. I'm fairly certain Iraq is Soviet style, and I'm fairly certain Iran is Soviet style. Libya probably is. You know, all those places that we have all these unfriendlies. So you really can never be 100% sure if you're getting pure Soviet tactics or you're getting an adapted version of it. Like Soviet tactics didn't really work in Afghanistan. I mean, when have you known the Soviets to pull out of a place?
They were fighting the wrong war game, in effect.
Right. This is sort of like we did in Vietnam when we were trying to play World War II with Vietnam.
Looks like he's done some serious damage, though. I've seen 2 or 3 of them that are dead.
And right now you wear the beret of the Krasnovians. I see the red star.
Yes.
What kind of headgear do you think you'll be wearing in the war games, say 10 years, 5 years down the line?
That's absolutely impossible for me to tell, but I imagine our uniforms will not change that much. The uniforms don't matter as much as the thinking that goes behind how the threat is going to be deployed.
We can shoot this laser beam out there. It can return and give you a 10-digit grid coordinate. Simultaneously, it also goes back to the Star Wars building or the Operations Center.
With this, we have the capability to receive simultaneously from the Joint Stars aircraft, the unmanned aerial vehicle, and the Commander's Technical Terminal Radio Network.
The computer system that we got right here and with the dismounted soldier system, not only are we providing him with timely and accurate information, but we're also giving him a real life, as if he was there, look at the battlefield.
Here we can see just about everything around. Supposedly rotor wing aircraft, i.e. Hind helicopters, fly around in the valleys. Here we can pick them off, hopefully. We're out here just like we would be in Saudi, 2 guys by themselves on top of a hilltop getting ready to shoot down aircraft.
So this seems pretty real then?
I don't know any way you can make a fake game when you know you're not going to die real. I know a lot of people that are here that are in positions in command that, when they went over to Saudi with us, couldn't handle it. And they're fine here. It's a whole different thing.
So far, what have you gotten out of it, personally?
A sunburn.
After Wired magazine took me on as a freelancer, I was able to travel deeper, further. I wanted to go where virtuality confronted reality, or as my military handlers put it, where the rubber meets the road. After Fort Irwin, I headed to Orlando, Florida, home of Disney World, but also Stricom, one of the strangest, the newest, most unusual command posts in the military. On my journey, I took with me my Hi-8 video camera as my visual notebook. I tried to make sense of this new kind of warfare.
What's it about?
It's about simulations. Read the back cover and you'll appreciate it.
The very definition of the real has become that of which it is possible to give an equivalent reproduction. The real is not only what can be reproduced, but that which is always already reproduced. I don't think I have got wrong with this thing. It doesn't sound like
the rapid automated generation of visual databases from standard and non-standard sources. Was certified ready for training months before Desert Storm.
As one walks the floor of this conference, what is striking is the high-tech nature of training and simulation. This place is better than Disney World and better than a science fiction novel. This is where fantasy meets reality and mecca for the true aficionado of state-of-the-art, whiz-bang high-tech. But it is here, at this conference, that you start truly to understand why and how we want to go forward.
It's the biggest simulation program of all time, involving multiple billions of dollars stretched out between now and the first decade of the 21st century.
Okay, blue lights at us one more time.
We're also big into a network simulation. It normally costs about $1,500 for a laser grenade.
Is there any possibility that sailors will confuse, say, the simulation with the reality?
Well, this is always a big concern. This is always a big concern that we have, is that there's got to be a disconnect between what the sailors think they're in and the possible real world activity of their decision. And case in point would be, there's got to be a physical disconnect between the button that they push to launch that missile and the missile launcher itself. Other than that, I want them to understand that they are in a real world situation. I want them to feel beads of sweat coming down out of their brow.
I think you're going to find out that there are many sectors of the entertainment industry that have a great deal in common with your businesses. So if some of this seems reasonable, good. If not, then again, keep in mind, we win successful contracts with smoke and mirrors. It's a good thing in our business. One of the things I'd like to do this evening is tell you a little bit about what we do, and more to the point, how it applies to what you do. Many of you know this already because we're working with you.
Human being and his movements being articulated and translated and being represented in a virtual environment.
We see possible uses for mission rehearsal so that a person can practice before he actually lands in a place like Bosnia or Haiti, and can physically go through himself the buildings where he's going to fight.
How particularly did the entertainment industry use this?
Actually, they used it for special effects. For example, in the Batman movies, where you physically don't want a person swinging between buildings, you could simulate that. And in fact, it was used for the Batman movies and Alien.
So the project actually started a couple years ago, back in 1994, when after a general officer symposium, we were tasked to take a look at commercial off-the-shelf war games to see if any could help teach an appreciation for the art and science of warfare. And right away, we saw Doom, started playing with that, and rather quickly identified it as having potential as a micro-tactical trainer.
So how would you rate this compared to the civilian?
Oh, it's much more realistic, the changes we've made, because we've turned your health down to 20% to start off, so a couple of hits and you're dead. And took digital photographs of the M16A2 and the M249 Golf squad automatic weapons, took out all the science fiction monsters, goblins, sci-fi weapons, all that kind of stuff, and really marinized it as best we could. So we built Marine Doom.
If you're hit by enemy fire...
Right. You'll scream and turn around, hey, what are you doing?
Is that friendly fire?
Yeah, that's friendly fire.
Do you see anything you do for the entertainment industry value for the military? Which way does the spillover go?
Actually, it goes from military to entertainment. What we find is that the leading edge simulators actually go over into entertainment directly to the games market, and then even a little bit more indirectly to the entertainment field. But the military battle simulation techniques of a couple of years ago are now part of this year's electronic games that are being introduced at Christmas.
The whole purpose of this is an experiment which is being installed at Fort Hood, Texas, to assist the Army in digitizing the battlefield from from brigade down to the individual soldier level.
And so we can put them in a position where they can train for night flights over Baghdad, or see what they can perceive about the target area, the environment that's there, where the various enemy defenses are, how to be able to avoid those.
Are you doing any work like on, more abstract considerations of future wars, future conflicts?
Well,
the
wargaming effort that we were talking about is really part of, I don't know if you're familiar with Andy Marshall, and in fact this Newport war game that I described was in fact a part of Andy Marshall's capabilities that they have, the Managing Technology Revolution. What they're using is the simulation as a way of being able to evaluate things for which we have no forces.
What this depicts is all of the major operations we've been engaged in since the collapse of the Soviet Union and fall of the Berlin Wall.
At the end of the Cold War and the loss of this enemy and, the 7 major threats that Wolfowitz, I think, came up with and others, can you compare that to any other time where you've seen this, suddenly everything seemed to be wide open? It wasn't quite clear it was going to be a re-emerging global threat, I think is what they called. Have you ever seen anything like that in your time here?
No, I think not in my time, but if you look back in history, I think you see it. I mean, the 20s were like that. The 20s, it turned out to be a period of illusion about what the world was going to be like. We're at the beginning of this kind of technical change, and it's working out its implications for whether something like the 30s stands, before us. I don't know.
The New World Order is long on new and short on order, as one recent observer has characterized it, 1,000 points of darkness. This is because the new world we have entered is far from being clearly definable, and it cannot be characterized as precisely and as succinctly as the one from which we are emerging. Yes, we have slain a large dragon, but we live now in a jungle filled with a bewildering variety of poisonous snakes. And in many ways, the dragon was easier to keep track of.
Okay, if you could roll soldiers of peace, please.
UN convoy inspection.
Mike, sir, I'm the Deputy S3 from the Combat Maneuver Training Center here in Hohenfels, Germany. What I'd like to do at this time is give you an overview briefing of CMTC and some of the significant actions that we take here to train forces in USERA on operations other than war and high-intensity conflict.
The point that our slide in the briefing made to you is that in the spectrum, hopefully made to you, in the spectrum of conflict that goes from war to peace, you have this gray area in the middle, which sometimes isn't gray. You may be manning a checkpoint and manning an OP. Another part of your AO, you got people shooting missiles at helicopters and missiles at F-16s. So what area are we in?
What's easier or more difficult about running an exercise for an operation other than war than running an exercise for conventional warfare?
Well, I will tell you there are very significant challenges in stability operations as compared to what we use to term straight line conventional operations.
We're glad the UN is here. Basically, without them, we'll be crushed by the godless, heartless, cowardly villains that oppose us on every border. We perceive their arrival as a saving. They're coming to protect us from terrorist attacks and overwhelming military force. And they're not, basically, they're not kicking ass and taking down names.
This is the town of Oberschwend. It portrays a town within the, that happens to be inside the zone of separation. It's close to the line separating the eastern portion from Vilslakia. We're in Vilslakia now, inside the United Nations zone of separation. And it looks like there's some kind of demonstration or some kind of activity going on up here.
As you know, Dan, you'll be broken down now into Slowania, Vilslakia, and also Euroland. And north of us, we even have a place called Fredonia. We put them in what I call the grunge look, the Eastern European look, if you will. As you see, here's an example of some of these guys walking around here.
You're talking about span of command and control. You're talking about the ability of an organization to deal with complex tasks with additional assets being thrown at the battalion commander, such as civil affairs.
Yes! Hey, I'm down, get you some food. No food down. Hey,
He's now at the front line. I mean, he could cause this thing to pass or fail.
The residents of the town of Panama City are more aggressive now, getting to the food. In fact, you see 2 armored vehicles that have approached the rear of the convoy.
We think it's very, very important. We've sent our officers to talk to commanders in operational areas. We watch CNN and other things. So I've got a bunch of folks upstairs who suck everybody's brain dry, and things happen out on the battlefield almost within the next 24 hours.
Some studies project that within 20 years, nearly 3/4 of the world's population will be living in urban areas. Blending our past history with current and projected future trends has led to an emphasis on conducting military operations in urbanized terrain. Operations in Panama City, Mogadishu, and Haiti are but a few of the examples of recent urban operations. One of the lessons learned is that urban warfare is a vastly different experience. It is characterized as close, personal, and brutal.
The key is for them to go in there, establish a humanitarian situation, few casualties, and there a lot of times there's language barriers. Occasionally they'll be called names because a lot of civilians just don't like the military in their country. It's more psychological warfare to kind of train them for that situation.
So were you supposed to play any kind of ethnic role, or?
Persians. Our ethnicity was Persians. In the Civil War, we don't wear Persian uniforms and they don't wear Boolean uniforms. The terrorists don't wear any special uniforms, so therefore they have to be able to go into a village and identify who's the friendly, who's the unfriendly, who's the Persian, who's the who's the Boolean.
That's all it is. It's a real world.
Who's the orange and who's the greens?
And the orange and the greens, well, we're all from the land of green. We're all.
A lot of them have played Doom, a lot of them have played other video games, so there's an intuitive sense of how video technology and computer technology works that we probably wouldn't have seen in their older brother's generation even.
You ever worried though that it'll get too much like a Nintendo game?
The way they're pushing it, they're trying to push with a big computer-generated thing, run you here and there, and do basically like the aliens off the Aliens War, the Marines, future technology, all of them have their own computer-built things. That's what it's probably eventually moving towards, and that it'll be many years before we see that.
You mean the Colonial Marines? And aliens, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were great.
Yeah, it was interesting there, but what did they learn from that? Platoon commander sat in a dang vehicle, wasn't out with his men.
I made the mistake once. I was out of Fort Irwin. It was the first digitized rotation, one of these advanced warfighting experiments. I made a mistake of telling this soldier that he looked just like the aliens.
You realize this was all done in the movie Aliens.
So he just gave me that stony look.
Another movie. It's like insulting.
Is there a competition between them, the forces, though, to get the technological edge?
Well, the Army is actually doing now, they're trying to convince, it appears trying to convince the government that they don't need the Marine Corps because they're trying to do our mission now. They're trying to do small intensive conflicts, Somalia, Kosovo, places like that. That's the way of the future right now. The Marine Corps has been doing that for the last 20 years.
A lot of pressure to be more lightweight.
Yeah, so, well, the Army's just a big monster when you think of the big mechanized divisions and the divisions they have. Sure, eventually we may need that if it goes, big conflict like with Saddam or something.
Today's contract signing will establish a historic partnership between the United States Army and California's world-renowned entertainment, high-tech, and higher education communities. And this project will prepare America's soldiers for the diverse and unusual military operations of the future. All in all, this landmark venture will help us build a future that is brighter, more prosperous, and more secure. Now, if we can only figure out a way to create a virtual governor, I could be in 2 places at once, and I would give you the rest of the year off.
In announcing this very exciting partnership between the United States Army and the University of Southern California, to be known as the Institute of Creative Technologies. This $45 million contract will fund joint modeling and simulation technologies research that has high-value applications for the Army, as well as for the entertainment, multimedia, video game, film, destination theme park, and information technology industries that are such a key part of California's economy. It will also enhance our weapons acquisition process by allowing us to test new doctrines in synthetic environments that are populated with intelligent agents and future threat challenges.
Most people in America don't realize that we're on the cusp of the inner edge of a revolutionary advance, that it can only be compared with Gutenberg's invention of movable type and the emergence of television itself. We are in the binary number world, the world of virtual reality, which is going to be part of the embrace of this great new cooperative venture. And whatever it is that the motion picture industry and all of its accompanying colleagues like Mr. Beluso can do, we do with great jubilance and great pride. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
James Dedarian from Wired Magazine. Is there any sort of check and balance, an ethical check and balance, that when you pair together the power of Hollywood with the power of technology, that we won't have something like Wag the dog down the line coming out of the USC Center?
As Jack is coming up to respond to that, let me just make one comment. This ability to simulate began in Greek theater. And one of the points that Plato's Socrates makes over and over again is that poets lie because it was so engaging and so attractive that it sometimes led people astray from the truth. And that's been true with almost every sort of entertainment medium ever developed on the face of the earth. Now, with that as a prelude,
I want to illuminate for you a central truth that has existed today. And the gentleman worried about Wag the dog taking place. I think sometimes we have what I call a Copernican complex, and that is each of us believes the world revolves around ourselves and not around everybody else. For example, dropping the atomic bomb in Japan. A lot of people thought that was a heartless and terrible thing to do. The people who thought differently were the 100 or 150,000 young American boys whose lives would have been lost if we had had to invade Japan. So you have to look at this not from your own perspective, but from everybody else's perspectives.
I'd like to ask one question. How do you respond to this question of blurring of the war and the game?
As far as the blurring of the war, I certainly know the difference between a simulation and actual war. Now, there is definitely some positive transfer for the training of people in the military. You get to try out different what-if scenarios. You get to minimize loss of lives, as we found in the last war.
The digital era is on us. The era of virtual reality. It's going to reshape and revise in a radical way the way information and entertainment has been conveyed to us, and how you can use it for urban planning as well as war planning. This is the future. Except what you're seeing now is going to be primitive to what you see 5-6 years from now.
Once Silicon Valley broadcast TV and Hollywood film were added to the mix, a much worse threat emerged. Where made-for-TV wars and Hollywood movies blur, military war games and computer video games blend, mock disasters and real accidents collide, producing on screen a new configuration of virtual power. Using computer simulations, media dissimulations, global surveillance, and network-centric warfare, it deters, disciplines, and if need be, destroys the enemy from a distance.
With a 200-year history of industrial age warfare, we now have the opportunity to ask ourselves questions from an information age perspective. If there were infinite speed of technology proliferation and infinite speed of information proliferation, what kind of attributes would I have to maintain a competitive advantage? I do believe that to a certain considerable extent the nation makes war the way it makes wealth. And you're seeing a restructuring of society with the information age. Part of the overhang of the industrial age is to highly integrate and optimize systems and subsystems. And in that, you create striking systemic vulnerabilities. And you need an organizing principle which is capable of accommodating those. Network-centric warfare is such an organizing principle. There's an acceleration, and we should expect to see that acceleration in the adoption of revolutionary concepts. We may, in fact, go somewhat faster, but it's not clear. We may not yet reach the point where you get the profound acceleration. They may be lacking the catalyst to that profound acceleration, but it will come. I think there's little doubt.
You know, some people talk about the Gulf War as being the last industrial war, first postmodernist war. Does Kosovo represent something like that now? As like the end of classical war, the beginning of something entirely new or different?
No. It's just one of a range of things. We said in Joint Vision 2010 that you should have full spectrum dominance. Right. What that means is everything from the highest high-intensity conflict down to shows of force and peacekeeping. You should be dominant in that when you put the American forces in.
What about remote warfare? Fighting air wars without the risk of losing pilots, using just precision munitions.
Sure, go ahead, let's do it.
The downside?
The downside is, A, you can't see what you're doing, B, you can't adjust as flexibly. Even though it looks like it should be very easy to set up these unmanned aircraft, fly them out there. Wow, sir, you can put a sensor suite on there. Listen, these things are so good. You can buzz that target at 15 Gs. You'll have your TV camera in the back. Why, it'll be it'll be phenomenal. Meanwhile, you got some guy on the ground saying, I can't follow this. It's like what we're doing in northern Iraq. Just flying aircraft over, see, is anybody alive down there? Anybody at home?
Ce phénomène émergent appelé Infowar. Nous sommes devant vraiment une mutation totale du phénomène guerre.
Le Gulf War était-il le premier cyber war?
La guerre du Golfe a été une guerre mondiale en réduction. Pour la première fois, contrairement à la guerre du Vietnam, on a eu une guerre mondialisée. C'est une guerre qui a eu beaucoup plus lieu sur les écrans que sur le sol, qui a eu lieu dans l'artifice de la télévision, beaucoup plus que dans la réalité du champ de bataille. Aujourd'hui, la question se pose de la nature de l'accident des nouvelles technologies. Il y a les virus, mais je crois qu'on n'a pas compris la puissance de l'accident virtuel. Les technologies de l'information, il est global. Donc on est devant un nouveau type d'accident dont la seule référence, la seule analogie, mais ce n'est pas une bonne analogie, c'est le krach boursier. Programme trading, c'est le krach de Wall Street. Il y a là une image de l'accident général.
You asked about science fiction. This is what I think is the worst case scenario. We have a major year 2000 problem. Not necessarily major technically, but it may be major in the way society chooses to respond to it. And it cascades by virtue of the increased globalization that we have. It cascades. And someone says, and increasingly people say, fix this. Because we now have so much of our quality of life depends on these things. And someone says, we can fix this. This can be fixed. There are, however, some conventions that we have to suspend in order to be able to do that. Certain elements of privacy rights, liabilities, indemnification changes, and pretty soon we're talking about things that today would bother a whole lot of people because they seem to attack some fundamentals in rule of law, even.
Posse comitatus?
And yes, and the people say, well, I can't. I can accept that. I can accept that to reestablish the order in my quality of life. I think that's a doomsday scenario.
Before 9/11 and after 9/11, it's as if whole histories, critical questions, and future hopes disappeared into this temporal rift. Lost in between was a credible story of what happened and why. Earlier administrations, including Clinton's, operationalized the revolution in military affairs. They promoted a vision of bloodless, humanitarian, hygienic wars. Post 9/11, Bush's inner circle radically upped the ante. After a remote aerial war fought by predator drones in Afghanistan, breathless reports by journalists traversing the deserts with the troops, and Defense Department briefings of shock and awe over Baghdad, color commentary and the shades of opinion were reduced to the nightscope green of videophone verite in the desert and red, white, and blue in the studios.
So it doesn't have to end badly, in other words?
No, it doesn't have to end badly. And that's what we're trying to get them to see. There's alternate means besides just lighting them up. Taking his house down 10.
It killed 9 people. There was a couple innocent bystanders that were killed. So now, we've got 9 people down there that are killed. That might start a protest. Now you've just changed the whole direction of the camp. We're going to a danger zone. We're going to a war zone. And I don't think they're going to be too friendly when we get there. We're America's 911 force. You know, we go where they want us to go.
Into this world we're thrown. Like a dog without a bone, and we're out alone, riders on the storm. There's a killer on the road.
My travels in virtuality ended where they began over a decade ago, in the sands of the Mojave Desert. The revolution in military affairs had met its bitter end in the streets of Fallujah and elsewhere in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, as a counterinsurgency, an occupation.
Good morning, welcome to 1st Battalion, 25th Marines.
We're in a different war than Operation Iraqi Freedom 2003.
How do they tell friends from enemies?
Sometimes it's very difficult. And the Marines have to be able to basically ratchet it down, if you will, to deal with civilians, and then ratchet it back up, realize there's always a bad guy lurking in the background somewhere.
Need security moving on.
think 50 Titans that are Iraqi American.
Do you know what's going on right now?
They casualty procedures.
An IED just went off?
Yes, sir.
We brought an ambush. Two commander deal with one thing, we're following the step up and deal with the ambush. Everyone understand why we did that? Then we're gonna talk about our continuous actions. My favorite. Talk about movement towards objective. Can't get too fancy out here. Talk about dispersion of speeds, formation. The main one we're gonna focus on here is 360 inside the village. All right, I wish you all the best of luck. Take care of your Marines. Don't let them get complacent. Stay on top of them. Good luck. Good luck. Appreciate it. Good luck.
Today, I can say that our troops in Iraq will definitely be home for the holidays. This December will be a time to reflect on all that we've been through in this war.
We were told it would be a quick war and that we would be greeted as liberators.
We frequently use the military instrument of power as the default instrument. We're not very good at using the other instruments of policy. We are still living in a state of war. This is the longest period that the United States has lived in such a situation.
If we don't learn from all these other colossal mistakes, it could be the last one.
All the hopes of the end of the Cold War, you know, what happened to them?
After going through decades of footage, there was still one tape left that we couldn't figure out at all.
This is the worst case scenario. The hope was there in 11/9, when the fall of the Berlin Wall. Then we had all these disasters, the real disaster of 9/11, then the financial disaster of 10/11, but then you had the hope again, 2/11.
Regimes similar to Ben Ali's will be watching very closely.
These boundaries, as you well know, Wolf, were drawn by the British and French after World War I. So the whole state system of the Middle East is coming unglued.
Stability has left the building.
From 9/11 to 11/9 to 2/11, this desire for stability increases the volatility. It suppresses one of the most transformative forces until they reach a boiling point, until they erupt.
There are worries that the unrest is going to spread, and that certainly has negative implications for the world.
To that next question, is this contagious, and where could it go next?
We had a contagion with the sovereign debt issue, and now we're having a contagion issue with the North African countries.
What's Plan B?
What is Plan B?
That's right.
And then on the 11th hour, if people don't pay attention, don't wake up, that's when the zombies come. This is what happens. You can't stay on this path forever without consequences.
It was the victory of the United States over the Soviet Union, NATO over the Warsaw Pact, democracy over communism. We can use all the things, but the most important in these things, not the celebration, but lessons.
In the wake of the Cold War, there was a belief that a whole set of global problems were now amenable to resolution. It was believed correctly that the Cold War had exacerbated a lot of regional conflicts. This was a time of enormous optimism. President Bush, this is the father, talked about a new world order.
A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be.
There was a sense that this was the end of history, but the Cold War left behind a whole set of explosive, dangerous problems which we're still wrestling with to this day.
Cold War was not only about the confrontation between democracy and communism. It was also confrontation between two superpowers. And one superpower disappeared. So it was no real enemy. So you have to change your understanding of the world. But it is very difficult because it was stable rules of the Cold War. You're making your military build up, you know who is your enemy. You more or less sure this enemy will not attack you, and the enemy know that you will not attack them, but you have to be ready, and you able to control your own people around this idea. And then when this adversary disappeared, you're looking like stray, you lost.
Suddenly, with the thawing of the Cold War, any global enemy had vanished. And with it, what vanished was any reason for an escalation of the US military. And we know that as early as 1997, many elements in the neocon establishment were wanting to invade Iraq, but there was no rationale with which to sell such an invasion to the US public.
It was not only in the United States, it was all over the world, including the former Soviet Union and Russia. You're looking for the new enemy whom you will fight, and you are not thinking that the world changed. The biggest problem is that during the Cold War, we rely on our military strengths on the both sides, thinking if we're stronger, then we will be more victorious. And unfortunately, American political establishment still thinking that if you will stronger military, you will be really superpower, spending resources for some weapons that you don't know how to use. In the end of the Cold War, it is a simple example. Soviet Union built 50,000 tanks. So what happened? Now they rusted these tanks in the swamps of the Siberia.
We now have a new era, which we call the War on Terror. But as in the Cold War, we're once again in the business of intervening in the Third World to establish client states who will do our bidding. And a major part of establishing these client states who are aligned with our interests, not the interests of their own populations, is to make sure they have robust security forces for counterinsurgency, for putting down resistance to the state. And this is, of course, the classic mode of US intervention in the Third World during the Cold War. We've recreated that world, we've only done it under a different frame, this frame being the frame of the War on Terror rather than the war against communism.
Part of the blowback, as it were, of the covert war that the United States fought against the Soviet Union in the last phase of the Cold War was the creation of these monsters who continue to haunt us to this day. The United States is basically fighting a war against the remnants in Afghanistan of the very forces that the United States itself funded, supported, armed, trained, and in some cases created. So Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and his group, the Haqqani Network, and other elements of the Taliban regime are in fact groups that the United States supported for many, many years during the jihad against the Soviet occupation. They didn't come out of nowhere. These are the ghosts of the Cold War.
Whether it's from Afghanistan and Pakistan to Darfur to Palestine, all of these contexts of course overlaid with different kinds of historical interventions. So it's impossible to understand Afghanistan or the violence in Afghanistan today without understanding the role of the United States, of Iran, of the Soviet Union, or similarly of Pakistan, of the role Pakistan had during all those decades of the Cold War. Putting money into the military, the particular alliances that the Pakistani elite made with different international actors. So many problems that we now see as being within national borders, across national borders, are cross-territorial, are regional problems.
One of the biggest shifts that happened after the end of the Cold War was that it was a self-other dynamic that was at the heart of the Cold War, then disappeared. And in the 1990s, perhaps particularly in Europe, you saw this sort of first sense that it could be different, that you could actually have a world that would be fundamentally different in terms of security, perhaps the end of security. Then you have the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and you have the first Gulf War in 91. But I also think significantly in Europe, you had the wars in the Balkans. and reaching back to a concept of the Balkans, and particularly a Balkanization that comes into Western vocabulary in the 1920s in the wake of World War I. So in that sense, you get a more complex political terrain for the West to maneuver in. The big question then becomes, after 9/11, what do we see?
The end of the Cold War and the attacks of September 11th marked the dawn of another new era in international relations, an era whose challenges may be unprecedented in complexity and scope. In important respects, the great struggles of the 20th century, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, covered over conflicts that had boiled and seethed and provoked war and instability. These old hatreds and conflicts were buried alive during and after the Great War. But like monsters in science fiction, they have returned from the grave to threaten peace and stability around the world. So history was not dead at the end of the Cold War. Instead, it was reawakening with a vengeance. And the revived monsters of the past have returned far stronger and more dangerous than before.
At the end, we actually did a vivisection and cut its chest open while it's still alive, and took its beating heart out and stuff. It was really cool.
When I went over there, it was like, you know, it's not like you just went to another part of the earth. I thought like in some ways I went to another planet. It was really weird.
These are people and institutions that somehow exist and don't exist at the same time. So they're this kind of in-between, dead, alive, spectral kind of zone.
There's a disjunction here, not only of material, culture, and language, but a disjunction in time. This is going back to the 11th century, or is it in fact some super postmodern version of the world?
There was a sense we did not know who the enemy was, but it was out there somewhere.
These are not wars to be won. They got no state lines, they got no state agents, they have nobody to make a treaty with.
War will not resolve this problem. It will make some relief, temporary relief, and then this problem will grow and grow as happened with Berlin Wall, and then maybe it will be too late.
They are in a legal no man's land within the legal sovereign territory of the United States.
You see it time and time again. You know, we'll lose a few, but that's okay. We're okay with that. We need to get to this objective.
Things that we would define in ordinary experience as cruel or atrocity could be made legal.
They're free and independent, but they're not as free and independent as other places, and we find ways of justifying interventions into those places.
They basically operate best when there is a failed state.
They view them as tourists, and that's more a comment on the kind of work they feel they're doing, which isn't very much.
It says, you know, these are not political intervention. This is not a colonial takeover. This is not an act of war.
They found themselves presiding over a very far from liberal society, and effectively, as the whole thing unraveled, presiding over a civil war.
All resistance was militarized and seen as evil and had to be crushed.
Citizens are presented increasingly with signs that there is a violent world out there that has nothing to do with American politics.
You want to fight terror by killing people? That's terror.
And then that began to open my eyes to how we've been treating the people of the world.
The vast majority of Americans are just eager to put the war in their rearview mirror and forget about it.
You cannot sit down, look at things happening, and you don't do anything about it.
So you have a situation where people are in effect in limbo. They don't control the most important aspects of their lives.
All of this was not necessary. There is no justification for these acts.
Sometimes even they will not know whom they have killed, especially with weapons being used from a distance.
We only see the buildings, but we can't actually perceive the bodies laying down below.
What we're now concerned with is simply reducing the entire country to a series of targets.
It's not that the resistance is going to go away, it will just mutate.
I don't think the crisis is going to go away. I think what they've done is put a lot of sticking plaster on the wounds.
People are sick of not having jobs. People are sick of being underpaid and overworked.
They're all interlinked, whether you're looking at the Middle East or Africa or Latin America.
Just imagine you have companies going out there and paying people $1
They are forced to accept a job with no contract, with no regulation.
There was, for a while, a kind of privatization of the future.
We're just getting to grips with what we've built. And what we've built has become more concentrated because of the financial crisis. We've gone from too big to fail to too big to bail.
And so there's a terrible, haunting feeling that we brought a disaster on ourselves.
When one privatizes so much, government is unable to function to deal with the lives of the people.
They want to make it come out right again, but it's a dead bad idea, walking again.
Eh bien, ils ont l'impression, à un certain niveau, de faire du surplace.
It's called the endless present. The endless present in a sense of a place without past or future. In a sense, the endless present is a time that condenses all times within it.
It really wants to create a kind of life where life becomes existence, that life does not become living.
And there's a very strong sense in all of this that the salvation is going to come from somewhere else. People become they're desperate and dispirited with the idea of government.
Fear is the most powerful motivator in world politics. So if there's a fear of the undead, there will be overkill in every sense of the word.
We haven't dealt with such issues, and until we deal with them, we are stuck.
Now, not only is unemployment high after the global recession, food prices are also up. High prices and joblessness equal, well, misery. For Egypt, though, it doesn't even tell half the story.
Iraq may have become a low-level conflict that will continue to claim this many civilian lives for years to come.
It's very hard to see any sort of way forward for this country.
They're beaten, they're resigned.
Okay.
The man said we're like zombies.
Like zombies.
We've just taken too much.
Suzanne, thank you for helping us just sort of put that in perspective.
The zombie represents a fuzzy unclarity where you are neither going forward, and since going backwards is not possible, then you are stuck. And unfortunately, whole populations in this world, we are in that kind of place. That's a zombification.
The zombie here functions for me something like recognizing we're in a period of interregnum, we're a period of transition, that the past has already died and the future hasn't been born, and that's what the zombies fill that space.
In many ways, the modernist forms of statecraft have been profoundly undermined, right? And the degree to which a good deal of what used to be the business of government has been outsourced, both in terms of bureaucracy, policing and security, even control over the means of violence, sometimes even the fighting of war.
Who are these guys?
And there was a strong feeling there that the society was out of control because there was a specific policy to cut back on jobs, to privatize large areas of the society and economy. And that left many, many more people out of work. The degree to which capital, in many senses, now controls the economy at a level above the scale of most nation states. This phenomenon undercuts the capacity of states to govern in many of the ways that they could appear to be governing before. So I think in many places, one has the feeling of a disintegrating of order.
Next on the show, we head to Apocalypse America.
The reality is this debt ceiling crisis was a little bit manufactured.
Having flashback fears. Okay, the fear's killing us. Don't talk yourselves into recession.
Are we cutting fat or are we cutting growth with this new austerity?
And now there's a sovereign debt crisis following on the banking crisis, which always happens. Why anyone's surprised by this, I don't know. It's not clear that the sovereigns have got any money left because they took it from the taxpayers to bail out the banks. The banks have now got that money and they're using it to bet against the sovereigns that just saved them. How's that for irony?
The magical way in which money could beget money by moving things around very quickly, by taking toxic debt, witchcraft-like debt, and moving it onwards, rebundling it. And in the very movement, what you could do is to generate wealth and keep passing on what were the destructive dimensions. But somewhere, somehow, that would come to rest and the whole house of cards would come down.
We are in the midst of a once-in-a-century credit tsunami. The crisis, however, has turned out to be much broader than anything I could have imagined.
Or people talked about zombie debt, debt that you thought you'd paid off, but somehow was never laid to rest.
David Cameron isn't the only Eurozone politician concerned about the economic undead. Greek Finance Minister George Papakonstantinou clearly has werewolves on his mind as he warns that there's no single silver bullet that will kill off Europe's debt crisis.
So this is huge. We've built a massive volatility generator that randomly redistributes wealth and income, not just in societies, but across the globe. It's an uncertainty pump. It means the system is very complex, very non-linear, very dynamic, and we don't know where it's going to come to rest, if it's going to come to rest at all.
We've become a high-speed, high-tech, high-velocity society. And the market crash of 2008, 2009 is a perfect example of this. What's happened is that there's been a systemic shift. We've transited from a traditional, slower economy of boom-bust to one of bubble burst that's inherently catastrophic in nature.
Perception becomes reality. You know, you can claim how safe you are. If people are spooked, they'll pull their money out, and therefore you're then not safe. So it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy there.
There are algorithm-powered robots trading and moving the market. Some estimates put their activity at 70% of all trading volume.
You can't write a perfect program, so even high-frequency traders have a problem setting this up.
And the CDS markets are different than they were in 2008, thank God. Unfortunately, still not regulated. That's the other crime of all this.
In terms of the loss of incomes and outputs, this is as bad as a world war. That's the scale we're talking about.
1% of the American population have 2/3 of the national wealth. It sounded good at the beginning, the idea of getting free from the rules. But the new rule is the rule of impoverishment of society, and at the very end is the rule of slavery.
The zombie spoke to what was happening to a whole category of worker who was in a sense being eviscerated by the conditions that existed and was like a member of the Walking Dead. But now it was specifically linked to the ability to take over whole people and reduce them only to workers, and to keep them like things in cupboards under floorboards, and to be able to suck them dry for these new forms of wealth. And what struck us as very interesting was the degree to which that image seemed to speak to things going on elsewhere in the social field, where people were saying things like, how can you have growth without work? How can they talk to us about the fact that we must be patient in this new economy, because right now what we're seeing is something we call jobless growth. So that was another kind of feature of this moment that suggested, that all was not well.
In some ways, zombies are the perfect metaphor for the global war on terror. I mean, Dick Cheney talked about the 1% solution, which is that if there was even a 1% chance that Al-Qaeda would launch an attack, the U.S. would have to launch aggressive countermeasures. Well, if you extrapolate that to the zombie thing, even if there's only a 0.001% chance that the undead would rise and, eat humans, you're going to have to engage in pretty strong counter, security measures, to prevent that from happening. The other problem is that another tenet of neoconservatism is the revolution in military affairs, the notion that you can shock and awe through military pyrotechnics the enemy into acquiescence. You can't shock and awe a zombie. So if anything, inevitably, U.S. forces would be sent in too light, there would be an insurgency, and of course the insurgents could draw upon U.S. forces to create new zombies. So you would have to have a massive surge that would be incredibly costly. And it's not even clear that that would work.
In a sense, we're in the zombie version of the Cold War right now. The idea of a kind of global mobilization against a kind of threat that is total and existential, but is slippery enough to be everywhere and anywhere.
They say that perhaps the idea of peace or war is too simple in the internet age, when the world could find itself in a third, other than war mode.
The threat could be anywhere, it could be committed by anyone.
Absolutely unprecedented in terms of destruction here, and actually in the character of an enemy.
We must take the battle to the enemy, disrupt his plans. We are in a conflict between good threats before they emerge.
Our effort will involve disorderly regions, failed states, diffuse enemies.
War has now become this kind of shapeless enterprise. Nobody thinks that a decisive battle is going to produce a decisive victory. So that the fear of long, drawn-out, amorphous, problematic wars constitute the template for what future American wars are going to look like.
These are very diffuse kinds of almost para-national, non-state actor, diffuse and shadowy forms of warfare that are written about very clearly and very analytically in things like the National Security Strategy documents. This is the way within which future wars are being described.
There have been a lot of, in the post-9/11 Commission kind of reports, that there's an emphasis on red cell thinking, that we do need to have folks that are doing alternative analysis to the mainstream. And when you're faced with this thing that you don't understand, and we are faced with things that we don't understand, the temptation is there just to create a meta-narrative that explains all kinds of things. And by doing so, you lose visibility of what really is in fact happening in front of you. And I think that there is a cautionary tale about how you approach things that you don't understand, and then you build up a body of knowledge that makes it seem like there's something real.
We spend all this money and we miss Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, we miss the Arab Spring, we miss the breakup of the Soviet Union.
It is not like you were looking at the Soviet Union for 40 years.
The danger may be that our effort to try to guide all of this, in fact, will have even more negative repercussions. You're right. Stability has to show some movement now. We have to begin to see change.
The question is whether you can really do this surgically and whether there is anything surgical that could have a blowback effect.
The threat for real is no longer outside our borders. It's within our borders. And it's not within our borders with something that we can reach out and grab, like Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden. It's going to be done by something that is going to be very, very subtle, and very, very hard to get a hand on. Climate change. What can you do? When do you call a drought really bad? After 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? How about a decade? How much resilience does the United States national system or the North American system have to handle this? And it's not as much as we would think. Our resources are already overcommitted, where it doesn't take a rocket scientist when one looks at the United States budget. We spend so much on Department of Defense that anything else that we should be planning, we don't have the money to do that.
America's war in Iraq will be over.
So this is welcome news, obviously, for military families, but it could be a costly move for contractors who have been cashing in these past 8 years.
If we need to fight a bigger war or another war, I mean, clearly the military isn't going to be constrained by budget cuts if we need them.
No, I think that's right. The threat environment persists.
Unless you're the Maldives, where you can look every day and see your nation disappearing before your eyes as the sea levels come up with, unless you're those countries, you don't have the will, and we don't have the will. But by the time the issue, certainly an environmental issue like climate change, gets before us, it will be too late.
Last year we saw 12 hurricanes, but none of them just made landfall here in the United States. They were steered away.
We appreciate you as always. Thank you so much. Well, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the agency, that's charged with protecting the public's health and safety, is getting you prepared for the zombie apocalypse.
And next month it'll add zombies to a list of disaster crisis scenarios at the Counterterrorism Summit. And over 1,000 military personnel, law enforcement officials, and other government workers will be there.
There's no state involved, and there's not even necessarily an agent involved. You're talking about things like pandemics crossing borders effortlessly, or climate change altering the likelihood of natural disasters occurring, or financial markets becoming so complex that it's impossible to regulate them effectively, or the internet becoming such an interdependent web that cyber terrorism can cause just as serious a problem as actual terrorism, or volcanoes. Well, the interesting thing is that a lot of these threats actually resemble zombies, in that natural disasters or pandemics, you're dealing with responses to what man does, but at the same time you can't negotiate with climate change. You can't negotiate with a virus, and certainly I think it would probably be the case that you can't negotiate with a zombie either. So, what zombies would inevitably contribute to is, further state collapse.
Climate change plus the refugees converging as a major transnational issue, is going to make responding to disasters like Katrina small by comparison. In World War Z, we talked about offline, the issue comes up in terms of how our military are organized and for what mission in the novel itself, because it talks about all the high-tech gimmickry that we've got and how the Battle of the Bronx in the story, all that stuff, but there were millions of people coming across. Now those were zombies. In my case, replace the word zombie with refugees, and I don't mean them to be the same. But imagine the same kind of consequence, seas of humanity, and what's more, it'll be worse because we can depersonalize the zombie. The zombie's dead, but the refugees that will be coming will be people. So there are lessons in that book, and by the way, it's required reading for some military organizations.
Thank you. This is not the normal crowd that I'm used to addressing. These are not Starfleet uniforms, so I'm clearly not a Comic-Con. What I've learned is that there are no more local problems. And at the same time that we are so vulnerable, that we actually need each other more, that we need more cooperation, we need more integration, and we need more of a sense of community than we've ever had, we have more forces within our own political leadership that are calling for its disband.
It's my pleasure today to introduce Mr. Max Brooks. He's considered the world's foremost zombie preparedness expert. The reason he's here is because I think he truly understands the potential for global crisis and just how unprepared we might be. Max Brooks.
Thank you, Admiral. We live in a planet where, I guess the best metaphor, and it's fitting I should be at here, is we literally are all in the same boat. What I was trying to do in World War Z was bring people together in a connection and see how what could be an environmental crisis or a medical crisis or a social crisis of today will become a national security crisis tomorrow. We can't just stand back and turn on the TV and then when there's a crisis suddenly send in the Marines and expect them to clean everything up. And the last 8 years have taught us that. There's a part in the book which is very Katrina-esque. I wrote it before Katrina. And I thought I was going to get criticism on it because people say, well, this would never happen because people always do the right thing in crises. Panic can destroy us, and in Yonkers it does, but we've had crises that would have destroyed other nations, that they never would have recovered from, and we keep rebounding. For me, the zombie genre it portrays how truly fragile we are, because let's face it, in the post-Iraq, post-Bush America, which is coming soon, we have to rebuild a lot. And we can't just be like the Europeans, just be like, life is our shit. No, we're gonna have to roll up our sleeves and do a lot of work.
In the end, if any light gets through, it's extreme optimism, because as long as people keep questioning it, as long as people keep trying not to get bitten by zombies, because you got to think it'd be kind of easier sometimes. They're tired of running, they're hungry. You know what I mean? What's left in the world? You know, there's something wonderful in that. The light that pushes up through the darkness is the most hopeful light.
I feel happiness, I feel euphoria, I feel I'm coming back to life again.
Moi, je vois ça comme un grand espoir et sans doute le commencement de quelque chose qui risque peut-être enfin de déterminer, de pousser le vent de l'histoire dans une autre direction.
Are we talking about the emergence of a new internationalism, where because of this net-centric form of relating to one another, new political allegiances can be made?
I think this is a moment that could change our whole global perspective on how people create change. people are making a difference individually, but put it together in a collective, and you have the most powerful thing than any tear gas, any tank. It's viral. It never ends.
There are moments in history in which profound questions about the possibility of new beginnings, what I call epiphanies of possibilities, that there are moments in histories when these possibilities are posed to us very sharply, and that it is important for us in the contemporary moment to actually think about those questions. And so freedom doesn't have, if you wish, a certain endpoint. There's no kind of final telos, no final end to it. It is something that changes constantly.